Yeah, sounds good. Sit down. Yes, but they were not also call Roman's meetings over. Hey, Stan. Okay. Nah. Who's phone? Oh, good luck. Nice knowing you. Did you put in your will who's going to be the next president of the club? Okay. Yeah, we finished that. Just stretch. Where we were or where they're? Oh, the 450 is just right. That's where we were. But the where we were.
Hey, Yuri, how are you?
I was just trying to
How no see?
kind of thing. We were kind of moving south. So basically, it's just 15. So he's asking where to go tomorrow. He's asking. Yeah, well, it was
That ain't the case.
we were like 50 fathoms mostly, 50 fathoms, and we were south of the canyon. The 450 is the 450. So when they're talking about it, they're talking about the 41, 450, the 41. And so we have the triple zeros is 41,000, and then we go up to like a 41,500, so it's the canyon. Then the east-west is the 2 line, and like 800 to 200, like 500,000. 450 is just south of the canyon. And that's where we were, and that's where the tombs were. Good luck.
I'd like to reconvene the September 24th, 2019 meeting of the Marine Resources Commission. Next item on the agenda is item number 10, public hearing pertaining to 4 VAC 225210 pertaining to taking of striped bass. Mr. Aspinwall, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Commissioner and Commission members. This is a public hearing to establish emergency amendments as a permanent part of regulation to Chapter 4 VAC 20-252-10 pertaining to the taking of striped bass, to lower the recreational possession limit in the Chesapeake Bay area, establish a 36-inch total length recreational maximum size limit, and establish commercial gill net maximum mesh size requirements in the Chesapeake Bay and coastal areas. So for a background, November 2018, the benchmark stock assessment for striped bass was released. The results of that assessment indicate that this fishery is overfished, and what that means is that relates to the spawning stock biomass, or the amount of mature fish in the fishery being below a threshold level. And that overfishing is also occurring, which relates to the fishing mortality estimate being above the threshold relative to 2017, which is the last year in the assessment. So these results were provided to the ASMSC Striped Bass Management Board. They immediately took action through a rebuilding scheme, or Addendum 6. The plan development team indicates that at least an 18% reduction in coastwide removals will need to take place to bring the F to the target within a year. So this figure in front of you looks at fishing mortality through the time series. That threshold, the dotted line is the threshold value. This is a value that we do not want to exceed. The latest assessment indicates that the coastwide stock has been fished at or above the threshold level for the last 15 years. And the 2017 estimate was 0.307. It's significantly above the threshold value, indicating that this fishery is overfishing. The other reference point is the spawning stock biomass. What we see is that biomass seems to peak around 2002, 2003. Since about 2010, we start to see a trickling down, a decline in the total biomass, where the biomass has been below this threshold for the last 5 years. The 2017 assessment is below the threshold value, which results in an overfish status. So the flow chart in front of you outlines the 3 approaches that the Striped Bass Management Board, ASMSC, will be faced with in October 30th. They will make a choice on the 3 different approaches, one being status quo, which is no change, which is always an option under ASMSC. Option 2, which is an equal approach, where the recreational sector will make an 18% reduction, the commercial sector will make an 18% reduction. Or option 3, which is where the recreational sector makes a 20% reduction and the commercial sector makes a 1.8% reduction. And from there are sub-options that would achieve that reduction. That approach will be made at the end of October, and following that action, we will have more of a request and a public hearing on what we'll be doing further with the quota. So turning the page, talk about the recent trends in Virginia's recreational striped bass fishery. The figure in front of you looks at the recreational effort in directed trips for striped bass and harvest from 2003 to 2018. The blue bars represent the directed trips for striped bass. The gray bars represent the harvest in terms of numbers of fish, and the orange dotted line represents the CPUE, or harvest per trip. And what we're seeing is really a decline in all 3 parts. We're seeing a decline in trips, we're seeing a decline in harvest, and more importantly, we're seeing a decline in CPUE, which is a little alarming because CPUE is often used as an index of abundance. And the 2018 estimate is noted as one of the lowest estimates that we've seen in Virginia, actually since the moratorium. The figure in front of you here looks at Virginia harvest relative to the total harvest of other states and what our ranking has been. And so Virginia has really been the leader in terms of harvest since 1990. We've been number 1, or at least the top 3, to about 2004. Since then, we've hit about top 5, and we dropped rank. It looks like we were number 7 in 2014, and in 2018, we're number 6. Talking about the commercial fishery, this table looks at the commercial landings in terms of numbers of fish and pounds in the Chesapeake Bay area. So the commercial fishery is a little different because it's managed through an ITQ system. What we see is that there are commercial watermen that utilize all their quota. There are some that underutilize their quota. And overall, for the Bay, on average in the last 10 years, about 86% of the quota has been achieved. And I think it's important to note that in 2015, you'll see a change in that quota. And that's a result of Addendum 4 in the Bay, when the commercial sector had to make a 20.5% cut. For the coastal commercial fishery, what we see is that more of that quota seems to be utilized. On average, it's about 91%. Unlike the recreational fishery, we really don't see a trend up or down per se. It seems to stay relatively stable across years. So following results of the assessment being released indicating that this stock is overfished, that overfishing is occurring, staff is proposing to lower the possession limit from 2 fish to 1 fish in the Chesapeake Bay area. We will not be modifying this season, but overall, lowering the possession limit to 1 fish will result in a 24% reduction, which achieves both approaches that the ASMSD Striped Bass Board will have to decide on in October. In addition, staff is also proposing to implement a 36-inch recreational maximum size limit for the Chesapeake Bay fall, Potomac River tributary, summer, fall, and coastal seasons. And so the savings with the 36-inch maximum size limit is 0.22%, which appears minimum. However, this is an additional effort to protect the spawning stock. There are multiple studies that show that there's a linear relationship between length of females and the numbers of eggs that they produce. And not just abundance, but literature suggests that they're producing more eggs that are larger, that are more viable, and that have a higher survival rate, which is very important. And that the commissioner asked at the last meeting, what is the difference in fecundity, for example, between a 36-inch fish and, let's say, a 44-inch fish. A 44-inch fish, on average, has 41% higher fecundity than a 36-inch fish. So I think the take-home message here is that this measure in savings may be minimal, but it's an additional effort to protect the spawning stock, and it's going to promote more recruitment in terms of eggs coming into the population. For the commercial fishery, we're proposing to implement a maximum mesh size requirement, 7 inches in the bay, 9 inch on the coast. Currently, there are no maximum mesh size requirements in the Chesapeake Bay or coastal area in Virginia waters. Maryland and PRC have a 7-inch maximum mesh. Again, this is to curb the harvest away from the spawning stock or those large breeding fish. We don't want to put a maximum size limit per se because we don't want to promote dead discards. We don't want to waste a resource. And so, in addition, quota adjustments will be considered again October 30th for next year. What that adjustment will be, we won't know until that meeting. We had a Finfish Management Advisory Committee meeting last week. We received feedback from FMAC and the public on the 3 issues that we're talking about today: the lowering the possession limit, the maximum size limit, and the gill net mesh size requirements. What staff did was take a poll from the audience first on these 3 issues. We started out with a 1 fish possession limit. We had 13 votes, 20% of the audience, which was a total of 65 people in attendance, were in support of this. We did not have any support for the maximum size limit. We did not have any support for the gill net mesh restrictions for this year. 9% were in favor of gill net mesh restrictions for next year, and 80% overall were not in favor of gill net mesh restrictions. And we were also asked by the public to take a poll on keeping the charter fishery at 2 fish and the private sector being at 1. Overall, 51% of the public were in favor of that. So FMAC did make a motion, which is a slight modification to staff's recommendation, which is to keep the 1 fish per person per day. However, they would not like to implement the 36-inch maximum size limit. The charter fishery would operate under the 1 fish possession limit during the spring and fall season up to October 31st. Starting on November 1st, they would operate under a 2 fish possession limit, one of those fish still being able to be 36 inches. They did not want a maximum mesh size for gill nets. They believe that this should be phased in at a later date, possibly next year. We also received a petition from a tackle shop with 126 signatures that were in support of FMAC's motion. So moving on to the regulation, staff does not have any additions or modifications to the regulation that we presented to Commission last month. So on page 6 of your regulations, section 80 will be lowering the possession limit from 2 fish to 1 fish in the spring summer striped bass fishery. In section 90, also on page 6 of your regulation, we'll be implementing a 36-inch maximum size limit. For the fall fishery, we'll also be lowering the possession limit from 2 to 1 fish per person. In section 100, in page 7 of regulation, we'll be modifying the language in subsection D. We'll be adding subsection E, which provides a maximum size limit of 36 inches from June 16th through December 31st, and we'll be lowering the possession limit from 2 fish to 1 fish. And for the coastal fishery, also on page 7 of your regulation, we'll be adding subsection D, which essentially provides a maximum size limit for the coast. So the minimum size limit would be 28 inches, the maximum size limit would be 36. Possession limit is already 1 per person, so we just wanted to leave that language there. On page 10 and 11 in your regulation, we'll be adding subsection A, which states that any registered commercial fisherman who is permitted to harvest striped bass from the coastal area in accordance with 4 VAC 20-252-130 and sets or fishes any gill net in the coastal area shall be prohibited from using gill net mesh size greater than 9 inches in stretch mesh. And subsection E, which states that any registered commercial fisherman who is permitted to harvest striped bass from the Chesapeake Bay area in accordance with 4 VAC 20-252-130 and sets or fishes any gill net in the Chesapeake Bay area shall be prohibited from using a gill net greater than 7 inches in stretch mesh, with exceptions for restricted areas defined in 4 VAC 20-751. So staff has received a total of 22 written comments. They come from both the recreational fishery, private and charter fishermen, also fishing organizations. In summary, 82% support the emergency actions provided by staff. 18% oppose the emergency action. Staff recommends that the Commission establish emergency amendments as permanent part of regulation to Chapter 4 VAC 20-252 pertaining to the taking of striped bass to lower the recreational possession limit in the Chesapeake Bay area, establish a 36-inch total length recreational maximum size limit, and establish commercial gill net maximum mesh size requirements in the Chesapeake Bay and coastal areas.
Any questions of Mr. Aspinwall by members of the commission? Thank you for getting that fecundity rate for me. I appreciate
Yeah, you're
that.
welcome.
Mr. Zedrin.
Can you explain to us what biomass means?
Biomass is in terms of weight of, and are you talking about biomass of the spawning stock? It's weight of mature females in the population. So when they do a stock assessment, they do it in numbers and weight, but the weight is in terms of the reference point. Yep.
Mr. Tankard.
Was there any discussion about the idea of just not catching spring fish, both recreationally and commercially, if we're worried about their fecundity and their...
I think, yeah, so that action, I think first started with the removal of our trophy season. That was primarily all large fish, 36 inches or greater, so that's where we started. But what we know from staff and what the data suggests is that a lot of these large fish are not just being caught in the spring, but a lot of them are being caught in the last 2 waves of the year, so November, specifically December. So lowering the possession limit in addition with the maximum size limit would curb the harvest away from those large fish.
Further questions? Ms. Everett?
So, I'm sorry if I missed this, but I know we're recommending action taken today to get it ahead of the October 4th start date of the season. And then at the end of October, ASMFC will provide their recommendation. Will recommendations again be revisited, even though it's mid-season here at VMRC, or how does that kind of align with the ASMFC decision?
Right, so on October 30th, ASMFC will make a decision on which approach first to go with 18% or the more proportional route. And then it will be up to staff to come up with a conservation and equivalency proposal, whether to move forward with our recommendation here or to choose what's been provided in the addendum.
Further questions? Mr. Tankard?
One more question. So, I mean, it looks like the recreational fishery has declined much greater than has the commercial fishery. And do you know those percentages?
Oh, yeah,
thought you had a percentage
for the
for that.
recreational fishery, I do. I know comparing 2018 to one of our more peak years, let's say 2000, I think 7 or 8. 2018 is a 92% decrease in harvest.
92%.
93% decrease in harvest. And it's not just 2018. 2017 was also one of the lowest estimates we've seen since the moratorium. So there's overwhelming evidence to suggest that, that abundance is lower than we've seen historically.
Follow up, Mr. Tankard?
So I guess my question is, why is it then that if the recreational catch is going down so hard, but yet the commercial fishery not nearly as much, why are we asking for a similar reduction in commercial recreation? It seems as though the fish are being taken by the commercial.
Right. So this is a coast-wide stock. So that approach is what was outlined in that proportional, where you saw a higher reduction for the recreational, lower for the commercial, because what they're doing is they're comparing it to the reference year, the 2017 year. Coast-wide, not Virginia, coast-wide, 90% of those removals were from the recreational fishery, while 10% were from the commercial. And that's why that option is there, and that option will be decided on in October. Virginia is a little bit different. Virginia in 2018 is split more evenly, 50% commercial, 50% recreational. If you back up to 2017, it's more like 60% recreational, 40% commercial. So our state really is not the 90-10 split that you see coast-wide, but that option will be available for the board to pursue in October.
And Mr. Tankard, that's a good point, because those that wish to argue in a certain manner, in a certain fashion, will hang their hat on that 90-10 without the clarifier that comes up about what's really going on in the waters of the Commonwealth of Virginia. Mr. Zedrin?
How do the majority of the commercial catch caught? Is it by nets? Is it
Gill
by
net,
gill nets?
primarily gill nets.
Further questions? Mr. Ballard?
Can you help me understand a little bit more the fecundity rate and the relationship to size of the fish?
So there have been multiple studies that look at fecundity, not just at age, but also at length. And what all those studies suggest is that as females get larger, that they produce more eggs. And so so last month we were asked to look at the difference, for example, between a 36-inch female and a 44-inch female. And on average, a 44-inch female produced 40% higher, more eggs than a 36-inch female. And so, having a maximum size limit in place would only promote more, protecting the spawning stock for one, but also bringing in more eggs into the fishery.
If I can ask a follow-up, it's not tabular in nature. In other words, it's exponential in nature, correct?
Correct.
Which means just because you have one that may be 40-inch with X, 42-inch, it's not necessarily the same amount. It's almost like the oyster. The larger the oyster, it's just more exponential. You know about them, so anyway. Mr. Tankard.
One more question. So, when we throw back something greater than a 36-inch fish, what's the probability of that fish continuing on and living and spawning?
So the hooking mortality estimate for striped bass is 9%. That was a study done by Diodati and Richards, I believe, in 1996. And what it did was look at a study for all the fish that were caught in saltwater using different hook preferences, different temperatures, different salinities, and overall the average was 9%. So if you were to catch a fish that was greater than 36 inch and release it, the assessment scientists would indicate that that fish has approximately a 9% chance of dying, essentially.
Further questions? Thank you, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, this, excuse me, this is a public hearing, and we'll be using a timer. You'll be afforded 3 minutes to provide your comments to the commission, and whoever wants to come first can come right on down. And I will tell you, don't think you'll be the last, and I'll cut the hearing off and somebody's going to jump up. If you're going to be heard, please stand up to be heard and come on down. Yes, sir, good afternoon.
Hello, my name's Wes Blow, recreational fisherman. I support what the thing that's proposed to us. Recreational fishing has been almost non-existent. You know, if you look at Rudy Inlet, 10 years ago, it was full of boats in January and February. It just doesn't happen anymore. We used to go to the high-rise bridge and expect to catch fish every night from before Thanksgiving till the end of the year. It just doesn't happen anymore. So the fishery is a serious problem, and I support what's happening, what's proposed to happen. I am really concerned about the gill netting of large fish in the springtime. That is unfathomable how that is even allowed to happen. Whatever measures can be taken to stop large female fish from being gill netted in the springtime, I think should happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Blow. Who's next? Good afternoon, sir.
My name's Mike Quinnen. I'm an attorney with Thompson & McMullen in Richmond, and I normally practice in the area of energy law, so you'll have to forgive me. I'm trying to climb something of a learning curve here. But I represent the Twin Rivers Watermen's Association, commercial fishermen, and I just wanted to make a couple of quick points. Doug Jenkins, who I normally deal with, couldn't be here today. One is that I think we saw numbers that show that the commercial fishermen are doing a good job of staying within their quota. And staying within the quota is what the commercial fishermen need to do to help contribute to the revival of the stock, of the population of the striped bass in the bay. The most immediate question that I have about the gill net restriction is timing, because the commercial fishermen have nets that comply with current regulations now, and they made investments in those nets for this season, for this year, and if the new rules go into effect immediately, it's effectively a taking of their nets. They're going to have to go out. I don't even know how quickly they can replace nets with nets that comply. And I haven't heard anyone address the issue of when the new regulations for the gill nets would go into effect, except that the Finfish Committee, I know, I don't know, they recommended holding off on these regs until the Atlantic State Group takes action. And that makes a lot of sense, because the Atlantic States Group is going to be taking action very shortly. And what's proposed, what's in front of the Atlantic States Groups with regard to commercial fishermen is either going to be an 18% reduction in quota or a 1.8% reduction in quota. And that's a big difference. And what they do there may well affect what commercial fishermen can reasonably do about their gill net sizes. So for purposes of the hearing today, I'm going to be working with the Watermen's Group on preparing written comments for the Atlantic States Group. They're due on October 7th. But for purposes of today, what we would really ask is that, well, prefer you to put off making a decision about gill nets until you see what the Atlantic States Group does. If you won't put it off entirely, at least put in some reasonable timing so that the fishermen have a fair chance to deal with the equipment issue. So, thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon. I'm John Satterley, representing the Virginia Saltwater Sport Fishing Association and the 600-plus members that we have. And we have our comments on the proposed establishment of the emergency amendment to lower the striped bass to the 1 fish per person per day and a 36-inch total length. We are conservation-minded and want to do our part in bringing the striped bass stock back to healthy levels. VSSA has spoken publicly about supporting this initiative. However, there is a divide among our members as to how this can be accomplished. Given this divide, we have provided the poll results, and I believe you received them, Commissioner?
Yes, sir.
And hope you'll take them into consideration when you make your decision. Also, we've had some anglers that have asked about the utilization of a tag system, which could be implemented to where they could keep one fish larger than 36 per year. And the tag would have to be purchased from the commission at, they suggested, a $50 price in advance of the time the fish had been taken. And we're cognizant of your time constraints on putting something like that in, but maybe it could be worded to where they could implement as soon as possible. And moreover, we are very deeply disappointed that other states aren't taking this as seriously as we are. I'm sure you look on the social media and you see that they're still throwing stripers in the coolers just up the bay from us, and they've been doing it all summer long. So I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. On to your comments. Number one, we are working on the trophy. One of y'all want to come up just to real fast address that, just to give you a heads up? Because I heard someone else ask about it. Thank you for your comments, sir. He'll hit the trophy tag for you.
What we're proposing is
Just Pat Gear for the record.
Pat Gear, okay. What we're proposing is a bonus fishery where, as he said, there'll be a tag, you would purchase a tag. We haven't decided on a price yet, and the idea behind that was it wouldn't be like a trophy fishery where we had in the past where you'd be able to catch one large fish every time you fished. It would be one fish per year or two, whatever that happens to be. And we'd have allowances for charter captains as well. We could not get that up and running for this, for this fall. I mean, it requires, if you figure there's 40,000, registered boats, registered boats plus anglers, and if all those people want to get a tag, you can imagine what that would be involved. So we're planning on having that up and running probably sometime by the spring, and so that's what we're looking at, a bonus tag program.
Thank you. And to the point in reference to other states, as I said before, Virginia's always been a leader as far as conservation and matters are concerned. We would hope that by taking this action, undertaking this action, there would be a trend set that the others would follow behind, realizing that's not necessarily going to be the case, but we believe that it's our responsibility to do what we're doing. So, who's next? Yes, sir. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon, Clinton Lassard from the Eastern Shore.
Sorry.
We'll start off, I don't want to go into the commercial and recreational argument here, but as we know that our limit, we have a spring season, I believe, it's April or May. It's a short recreational spring limit where we're allowed to fish. Commercial guys are allowed to fish and put their nets over, and they start a new quota, correct? And they can fish January 1st, put a net out, and they can have their quota. February, March, April, they can have it all. But we're worried about the pregnant females, okay? Our fishery, recreational and commercial fishery, recreational and charter fishery on the Eastern Shore is mostly November 15th through the end of December. Okay, we don't catch, we can catch the smaller fish in the creeks, but we don't have the same two fish where the 36-inch max on the Western Shore. Over there, I'm sure, and I don't know how they fish over there, but I'm sure they're happy with two 36-inch and under fish. On the shore, we don't catch those, okay? If we're worried about the breeder stock, if the recreational guys can't fish, why can the commercial guys set nets and fish and fill their quota? Why can't we all fish on the same, measure? Let's all have the same measurement there. Also, with the 36 max size limit, I just don't see, for as many people that fish on the Eastern Shore, and you're going to set a 36-inch size maximum, and we're talking about dead fish, it's going to be hard to catch a fish with live bait on the shore, by boat, but fishing on the Eastern Shore, under 36 inches. And if you catch a 40-inch fish, okay, and you catch another 45-inch fish, and you catch a 50-inch fish, now those are three fish that are being thrown back. And I don't know what the mortality rate is on them, but I think it's 1 to 9, or every 10 fish, one fish is killed. It might be more, it might be less, I don't know. One other thing, the numbers. The gentleman proposed numbers that were from 1996, I believe, in reference to the studies for pregnant females. Do we have any more recent numbers on the age of fish along with, their size limit their size, like a 44-inch fish? Does it have a 41% breeding rating? I don't know what that proper word is. Or does it decrease with age? If the last studies have shown 20 years ago, do we have anything further that has a better number? And one last thing before I leave. I don't know where the numbers are coming from as far as the harvest and directed trips. That number seems very, very off for a directed trip and a harvest calculation, where I've been to the dock numerous times and haven't had a soul checking who I was, what vessel, what I caught. I've seen it happen before, but you don't see it happen. So where do these numbers come from?
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Want to respond to that as far as the numbers, as far as the MRIP and that's concerned, because I think want to provide them.
Sure. So the latest stock assessment did use estimates of discard mortality from Diodati and Richards. I said 1996. I may need to go back and look at that. I'm starting to feel like that was more of a recent study. There's a lot of studies that were considered into the stock assessment. This was the most robust assessment, essentially, to estimate discard mortality, and that's why it was chosen by the assessment scientists. In terms of MRIP, that is a federal survey. Starting July of 2018 is when we had the new calibrated estimates that came in that were used. In fact, this was the first species to use those estimates in a stock assessment. So, we're using the latest science that we have to make the best management decisions for the future of this species.
Thank you.
Yep.
Mr. Bowden? You stand up.
Thank you, Mr. Bowman, members of the commission.
Good to have
I'm
you.
Ernest Bowden. I'm president of the Eastern Shore Working and Waterman Association. And I made the motion at the Finfish Committee as somewhat of a compromise. I've been on the Finfish Committee for over 30 years. When you look at the emergency regulation, this is one problem we actually know what the problem is. A lot of fishery stuff, we don't know what the problem is. This one is pure, simple fact. It is recreational discard mortality. The vast majority of it has nothing to do with Virginia. It's occurring in New England and lately also in the state of Maryland. With this measure on the recreational fishery, 36-inch maximum, you're looking at 0.22%, less than 1/4%. I believe Mr. Garrett told us it was 6,000 to 8,000 fish is what we'd be saving. That's usually what they kill in one day in discard mortality in Massachusetts. That's for the whole year for us, one day in Massachusetts. They probably kill over 10 million pounds every year from the spawning stock with discard mortality. So, we need some fairness in this. All the reduction that you're talking about in that 24% is coming from the one fish. It's not coming from the 36 inches. Why take an opportunity for recreational fishermen? You might have somebody young who's caught a fish of a lifetime, and they're going to have to throw it back. And you're really not gaining anything on 0.22%. It's going to be lost in the background mortality. Virginia's done a very good job at keeping mortality low, way better than almost any state. We're looking at two different things. We have the perfect storm of information. We have the benchmarks changed, but now we are approaching the old benchmark, so we do have a problem. I'm not going to say we don't. We're cutting close to 0.31, which was the old one. But along with that, we changed the recreational fishing survey altogether, and it showed that for years we've been catching way more fish than we originally thought. So you have that figuring into it. You're having a stock that's been lowered the amount that you can take. You're having new information showing that you've been taking more. Which one's correct, I don't know, but like I said earlier, we're approaching 0.31, so we are approaching the old one. We know what the problem is. It's clear. It's recreational discard, most of it in New England, but now a lot in Maryland. Some of it is regulatory, some of it's because hooking and release fisheries. We need to address it. We needed to have at least a circle hook position in this, but we didn't. When you talk about the net size, you're having some unintended consequences. You know, when you look at Potomac River and Maryland, which is used for examples, that's a distinct fishery. All the fish are one group. When you're in Virginia, there's no rivers on the eastern shore. So the western shore really is more representative of Maryland would be, because you have river systems. The eastern shore does not have them. So the eastern shore on the bay side more resembles the ocean side, because they don't have the availability of the small fish. So it's really different.
Mr.
And then on the
Bowden,
net size restrictions, you also have other fisheries.
I need you to try to wrap it up. Your time is.
Excuse me?
Your time is up.
Time is
If you
up.
can wrap it up.
Okay. So this is what I'm gonna say in finishing. We don't need to do the 36 inches on the recreational side. The mesh size, you're not able to buy nets. We're under completely different restrictions. We had the Marine Mammal Protection Act that really affects people in my position in the ocean and in the lower part of Chesapeake Bay. We are not allowed to use nets less than 0.18 millimeter. The webbing is not available. So basically, you're closing the fishery down by doing it. The Finfish Committee has been very viable for 40 years. Something like this should be run through us. Let us work with staff, see if we can work out something and phase it in. I've never heard anything just like that before. Thank you.
Thank you, Ernie. I appreciate it. Yes, sir.
Good afternoon. My name is Jerry Hughes. I'm a recreational fisherman from Chesapeake, Virginia. 4 years ago, I got lucky and I caught a trophy striper off of Cape Charles. The last 4 years in a row, I have spent 8 to 10 trips a year between Thanksgiving and December 31st trying to duplicate that catch. Now, it meant a lot of trips to a lot of tackle shops. I spent a lot of money on the Bay Bridge Tunnel, on gasoline. Luckily, this year on December 14th, I caught another one. Now, if I can't keep one, do you think I'm going to spend the next 4 years trying to catch another one by doing all of that? I don't think so. And my second thing is, show me where the state of Virginia has had any benefit from being a leader in trying to do something about this. The state of Virginia has never gotten anything from it, from AMFSC or anybody else. We're always the ones who try to set the example, but we don't get anything from it.
Thank you, Mr. Hughes. Who's next? Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon. I think most of y'all know me. I'm Chris from Chris's Bait and Tackle. We're also the ones that gave you the petition. I hope you've received that so you can see that most of our fishermen have that same problem that everybody has spoke about, where we cannot find that small fish that everybody's talking about. Alex did refer to people not catching their limit of fish, and again, I'll base that on the fact that we do not keep a small fish as a general rule on the eastern shore. Most of us are targeting these big fish. I also wanted to add that you talked about all the emails that were sent in for this. There's been quite a few Facebook posts from other states that are sending these emails in that are not even Virginia licensed or saltwater licensed people putting their 2 cents into our fishery. So I just wanted you to keep that in mind. The ones that are on our petition all have saltwater fishing licenses for this area. Obviously, in other states, you're seeing that they can keep the fish almost all year long. Our main striper season from my store is in those months. Most people are also in agreement of closing November 1st through December 31st, or November 15th if we have to, and doing a max size. Virginia has already done an emergency regulation. This will be the second emergency regulation that y'all are doing, and no other state has followed through on this. And we don't want the fishery to go away. Obviously, if we don't have fish to fish for, I don't have business either. I also wanted to comment on your figures for that study. I talked to Captain Jim Jenrette this morning about that, and the study that was done on the mortality of the fish was not done to the salinity and the cold temperatures that we have, and that it shows in that study not to use it, but just use it as a guide, and that it could be down as low as a 2%, I think it is, instead of this percentage that they're talking about. So please review that on that mortality rate study that was way back. I also have some suggestions on what we can do. And since we are in such a bad way, I would propose that you shut down the harvest of striped bass both to recreational fishermen and commercial fishermen during the spawning era. So that way we can let them spawn before we do any harvesting. I think that would be very important. I think when the striper season is closed, that we should not be allowed to target those fish in any way for catch and release to cut down on those mortality rates. And again, I said the max of 3 per boat. We should also incorporate another state has incorporated this no live culling regulation, similar to Massachusetts, where they said that discard obviously if dead legal or live legal fish, you shouldn't be doing that at all. If you bring that fish in the boat, that should be yours. I know it's hard to enforce, but we need to put some parameters up so that's not done. The practice of high grading, whereby legal size striped bass are released in favor of a larger fish caught is unlawful, and that is stated right in their regulations.
Chris, can you wind up for me, please?
Yes, sir.
Yes, ma'am.
One other thing is that the restaurants do not have to have a buyer's license. Me, as a bait shop, I have to have a buyer's license to buy from the waterman, but none of these restaurants have this. And there's no numbers to come back on what was actually harvested and what they bought. So I would appreciate something being done fairly. If I got to be the bad guy, then we should all have some kind of checks. So
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am. Who's next?
How you doing? My name's William Lewis. I'm from the Eastern Shore. I'm a retired commercial diver that worked in the fishery with pound net fishery for years. I also worked with marine fisheries to target some problems we had in the Chesapeake Bay with turtles and dolphins earlier. One of the problems I have with what you're looking at, about 8 years ago, we had a cold front come into the Eastern Shore, and that totally annihilated the fishery in October for striped bass. I mean, it completely left, obviously, because the temperature dropped 15 degrees. Since that time frame, we've seen a reduction every year in that fishery from migrating fish coming into the bay. Everybody looks and says that the fish that are in the bay are one fish and the other fish in the ocean are separate. I find that hard to believe. I think the migrating fish that come down from other states and come in here in the fall, those numbers are not being looked at. And I think that fishery that we look forward to and have seen in past years, 10 years ago, we don't have now. But yet we're not addressing that in this meeting. And I think that's a big problem of what's going on. I also think that the taking, as others have said, in the springtime of spawning fish, you always mention spawning stock. I think this is a big problem, taking those fish in the springtime and not allowing those eggs to lay. As we all know, a 50 to 60 pound fish lays 1.5 million or more eggs per fish. When you take all those numbers of fish that are sold in that time frame, that's a lot of fish taken out of the fishery. I'm in favor, like Mr. Lassard said, of the fishery staying open. I realize we need regulations, but I think the mortality rate needs to be taken into effect. The fish that come into the bay, the people who come here, and the tourism that is brought into the Chesapeake Bay in the fall is insurmountable for everybody on the Eastern Shore and local fisheries, I'm sure, on the Western Shore, the Tidewater area. To close this season down and not allow one fish, whether it's one fish per person, 3 per boat, or 2 per boat, to not allow something like that is going to be devastating to this industry in the recreational sector. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Leffert? Good day,
Thank
sir.
you. Good day. Good to see you. Thank you, Commissioner Bowman and Commissioners. All over the place on this. No, I don't have much time. What I've got, about a minute?
3 minutes.
3 minutes. What's unfortunate is that when we get to a place like this, is it causes the infighting that I see. It's the most discouraging thing when we get to these places. We've been here on flounder. We're going to be back again on flounder. Rockfish is no exception. I fully support a one fish per person recreationally, over the 36. These folks deserve to fish. They deserve to have tournaments. I think the numbers show that Virginia has had a healthy fishery, both commercially and recreationally and charter, for 25 years. We were front runners in the moratorium and the front runners in the recovery. We've been doing very well with our fishery management in all groups. I hate it that we have this infighting develop. When we look at, again, Maryland and Massachusetts, we need to look outside our borders. It's part of the problem. I think the previous speaker touched on something that, I don't know if there's two sources of opinion, but it's common knowledge that they are ocean migrants and that they do migrate, and that we have spawning fish that go out in the ocean in the summer. The waters are warm in Massachusetts are cool, but they're not that cool, so they do have a lot of mortality. They're killing a lot of fish in Maryland and Massachusetts, and neither state has done anything on the level that Virginia's done over the last 10 years. We continue to make sacrifices. We continue to fight amongst ourselves, and it's unfortunate. I've had a captain's license since 1994, in and out of the charter fishery, aquaculture, whatever I can do to make a living on the water. I've got a sympathy for, all the diversity in Virginia's fisheries. And I think that we should all work together and have a little bit more tolerance of each other as we work through this problem. The fish don't last forever. The fishing we enjoyed in 2008, those fish were spawned in the late 80s, early 90s. We know that, okay? We don't last forever. I think in our lifetime we might see another 2008 era on rockfish, and I hope we get there. But to get there, we got to work together, and we got to not punish each other and penalize each other. I want to answer one question I think that Ms. Everett brought up about the ASMFC strategies. And the strategy they have is much less severe than what we're doing. I know there's influences. I'm not naive. I know there's influences on us to do a lot more. But if we wait and see, and you look at the science, ASMFC has some decent science on this. They have a decent plan. The plan would not be nearly as draconian as we're trying to force on ourselves. I really appreciate the governor and I appreciate the commissioner on their willingness to be proactive and try to, set the example. Unfortunately, we have set the example time and time again. We have taken overages from northern states and paid them back ourselves. I really wish that you let these charter and recreational fishermen have their fish over 36. I wish that you would look into and hope that you would look into some less impact on the commercial fishery, which I think is a very clean fishery. We catch our fish, we get off the water. And again, the infighting, it really would not help any of us. And that's something I would ask the audience to take into consideration, is that we should not be labeling and accusing each other. This problem came from outside of our borders, and some of it came within inside of our borders. But we can work on something better here. And the ASMFC has a way. If we just listen to some of it, we could probably do some things here today that are a lot less drastic. It was very difficult watching Maryland keep all those fish this spring when we took an emergency closure. It was very, very difficult. I'm ashamed of Maryland. Maryland wants to talk about clean water and, they're really mad at Pennsylvania for not doing its part.
Chris,
Well,
you're
Maryland
wrapped
didn't
up.
do their part. Yes, sir. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Dean?
Good afternoon, Commissioner.
Good afternoon, sir.
Jeff Dean, Chairman of the FMAC Committee. We held the meeting last week because in the previous meeting, we discussed the emergency action, and there were a lot of commercial fishermen, or not commercial, recreational fishermen, mostly charter boat captains, that said it would put them out of business to have just one fish. Nobody's going to hire a boat for $1,000 and come fishing for one day and one fish. So we tried to come up with something in between what the ASMFC proposed and what the emergency rule asked for. And I think the committee came up with a pretty good solution. Now, there's a couple things I need to straighten out. There's two reasons for us being in the situation we're in. One is release mortality, which is quite frankly disgusting in the recreational sector. The other is that in 2005 to 2010, we had very poor recruitment in this fishery. Those are the fish we've been fishing on. That's the stock that has declined. In 2012 and 2016, we had extremely high recruitment. Those are the fish that will be coming into the fishery now. So we have a little buffer there to work with that'll help us get through a little bit less restriction than what we've posted so far. As far as viability, I used to believe that the older the fish was, the more eggs it had and the more viable they were. Lately, I've been involved with fisheries management for a long time. I had the honor of serving Virginia on the the Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management Council for 2 terms. And one of the things I learned that is the very oldest fish are like older females in our species. They're not always the most productive and the best eggs. So there's a little bit of something that needs to be cleared up there. I'm hoping that you can come up with a compromise that is somewhere between the ASMFC and the emergency rule that will keep these charter captains in particular in business. And as far as net sizes and commercial, I think we should wait till after the ASMFC says what we want to do. They're going to say either an 18% reduction like Virginia's recreational fishery has, or a 1.8% reduction. My personal opinion, although the committee doesn't exactly agree with me, is that we caused this problem. They're doing what they're supposed to do. They've been held to their decreased limit of a couple of years ago that was a 25% reduction that they now get no credit for. And I think to go after them for more isn't desired or isn't needed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else? Mr. Moore?
Good afternoon, members of the commission. Chris Moore, Chesapeake Bay Foundation. First, I just want to highlight, the striped bass fishery is one of our most iconic fisheries in Chesapeake Bay. It's one, in addition, that the Chesapeake Bay provides about 70% of the spawned stock for the entire Atlantic coast. So not only is it an extremely important fishery to us here in Chesapeake Bay, but the reproduction within Chesapeake Bay is extremely important to the coastwide stock as well. And actions that you all are considering are going to have a huge impact biologically, both here in the Chesapeake Bay and all along the Atlantic coast as well. And I think what you all have been looking at in terms of trying to protect that spawning stock is what you should be doing, and making sure we try to recover this fishery quickly. To make sure we do that, it's going to take bold action. As we saw back in the 80s, the striped bass stock responded well to management actions. We saw a very high biomass. What you all are trying to do now is make sure we get back to those, and it's going to take some bold action to do that. We know that. We saw the results of the stock assessment. But I hope as you're making your decision today, you'll continue to think about those bold actions you took back in August. You'll take action that will make sure we start to restore this fishery quickly, and that all those different sectors that have a benefit from this fishery, whether it's recreational, charter boat, commercial, you name it, will see the fruits of that labor very quickly as well. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. Who's next? Sir, good afternoon.
Sir, good afternoon. My name is Calvin Atkins. I've been fishing on the Eastern Shores probably 23 years now. And a lot of what everybody has said today is what I want to say, so I'm going to leave it alone. There's only one thing that I've noticed through the years. I've caught a lot of fish, caught a lot of big fish. I couldn't tell you how many citations I've caught through the years. I've released some of them. I've kept some of them. But when I seen the fish here, there was bait here. And nobody's talked about bait being in the bay. All you hear on the radio when you're out there fishing, the 1 week that I take off to go rock fishing, I look forward to Thanksgiving, then rock fishing for a week. And I might catch 1 or 2 fish and I go back home and go hunting. But nobody's talked about the bait in the bay. The menhaden boats, and I know y'all don't want to talk about this, are taking the bait away. A long time ago, I sat in the bay, watched the gannets fall on bait, bam, bam, bam. Now you can't find bait. So I think your numbers in the bay, because the bait is not here. The bait, they're catching it all and taking it out of the bay. And I think doing something with that, you might see the numbers go up. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Atkins. Who's next?
How you doing?
I'm fine, sir. How are you?
Captain Kenny Lineback, Eastern Shore, Cape Charles, Virginia. I've been fishing these rockfish 15 years, running charters. I've seen the good, the bad of it. I'm all for trying to get this fishery restored. I fished from November the 15th till the end of the end of December. For these rockfish, I only harvest 30 to 40 of these fish a year probably. And we need to do something about that. But as charter captains, the whole Eastern Shore runs on tourism, commercial industry, far as people coming there, tourism, coming there to fish, the hotels, the charter boats, the gas stations, tackle shops, and all that. We don't need to do something drastic where these people are not going to come here and fish. We need to do something. I understand that. Maybe in the spring of the year, we don't fish for them. But to take these big fish away, that's what these people come here to spend their money for. And without that, the Eastern Shore it doesn't thrive on these small fish. We don't have them. People's not going to come there. And everybody's bought expensive boats. Charter captains, recreational people buy expensive boats, spend money on the tackle, hotels, food, lodging, whatever. But the Eastern Shore is really hurting if you implement this small fish limit to us. The catch and release. We need to do something. I don't know the answer to it, but we don't need to do a drastic measure where we're not going to get anybody to the Eastern Shore to fish in the months of November, December. All right,
sir.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Could I finish my 3 minutes?
I'm sorry?
May I finish my 3 minutes? One more point. You do what's right, that's all.
I thought the 3 minutes was up when I looked over there. Was it or was it not?
The red light was on.
The red light was on.
Good enough.
Thank you. I thought it was. That's why. Yes, sir.
Well, I try to keep my eyes short and sweet. My name is Bill Tice, and I've been fishing since I could walk. And I turned 75 last month. Now, I look at the history. Y'all should know the history. When you close this fishery, I think it's been closed twice now. The fish came back. You continue to catch them. I don't care if you catch 5%, 3%, 2%. They'll never come back if you keep catching them. You're going to need to close this fishery for a year or 2 years to get it to come back. Because commercial or recreational, it'll come back. But if you keep catching them, they're not going to come back. And that's just the way I feel about it, and I've been here before. And if you look and remember the crab thing that y'all had, I'm not trying to bring it up, other than when you closed a lot of it, the crabs came back. Today, they're crawling the walls. That's the reason they're crawling the walls, because y'all stopped them. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else? Mr. Place? You weren't here, Kelly, when we opened up. It's a 3-minute time limit set by the timer. You can look.
Where is the time?
Right there beside you. It's red.
Thanks for telling me.
Yep, you got it.
Prepared for many years. My name's Kelly Place. I've been fishing for striped bass recreationally and/or commercially for about 60 years. I'm 62 now. Chaired the Striped Bass Advisory Committee for the ASMFC for nearly 10 years and served as legislative appointee proxy for a long time as well. I've read, I think, just about every single striped bass management plan, peer reviews, stock assessment, et cetera, over the last 30-some years. I'm real concerned about the proposed 7-inch mesh restriction, and I don't think that it was an emergency situation We're all for proactive measures, but I think to do this proactively would mean that we haven't learned a really significant object lesson from proposals we've made to the ASMFC in the past. That being that proactive action is good, but prior to hoping or expecting to get conservation equivalency credit toward whatever our landings, whether it's commercial or recreational, we found out the hard way that ASMFC doesn't give credit for proactive measures, and because that commercial situation is not an emergency situation, I would recommend that we do all our due diligence and study, whether it's socioeconomic, scientific, or whatever, put that forward at the ASMFC meeting coming up at the end of October, the annual meeting, ask them to assess any kind of conservation equivalency that we're seeking then. Otherwise, I think tactically and strategically it would be a mistake to just do it, put it on the table, then turn it down. Happened in 2012. The Bay jurisdictions took a 14% cut proactively, expecting we would get credit. We didn't. Other things we did in subsequent and previous years that we put on the table with great significance put Virginia at a disadvantage, both recreationally and commercially, to the other states, both temporally and spatially, in regard to the harvest and the characterization of the harvest. So because the time limit is, I'll just keep my comments to that one particular measure. I would like to point out that you probably know that a lot of commercial fishermen have invested in a wide range of different mesh sizes for striped bass, and a hallmark of a healthy fishery like striped bass is, I think, the way that commercial, specifically Virginia's commercial, has been managed. It's been spread temporally and spatially, again, over a wide range of year classes, and because of the temporal space of it, almost the entire year, we don't have derby-style fisheries. It's reduced bycatch. The commercial fishery over the years has reduced the size of fish dramatically. Many things I could point to that the commercial fishery has done, much of it proactive, all of it desirable from the moment, the feeling of the day, whether from ASMFC or VMRC, and it's at the point where the commercial fishery has absolutely zero responsibility for the excess mortality of the coastal migrant stock or the spawning stock biomass, especially in comparison to the other states, both commercially and recreationally. Our underages over the years, I think in 1996 we may have had a couple of pounds overage. It was immediately deducted. So for over 2 decades, I believe, we've had an underage, which serves as a buffer for other states and other sectors' overages. There's a lot more to be said on this, but I urge you not to make a hasty decision, because once again, it'll show that we hadn't learned the object lesson of not having proactive measures fully vetted by the ASMFC Technical Committee. And I'll leave it at that, but I do hope that you don't make a hasty decision on that. And there are a lot of other issues that should be discussed. I hope you have some more public hearings on those.
Thank you, Mr. Place. Anyone else? Thank you all for your comments. All well thought out, impactful, important. Now the matters before the commission for discussion and action. Mr. Ballard.
I have a few questions for staff. One relates to one of the gentlemen, I believe Mr. Bowden, gave us some statistics that 1% of the harvest came from fish greater than 36 inches. Do you know what statistic he was referring to and whether you agree with that or not?
So, yeah, I do. So it really depends on what year you're looking at. So, so I believe he's referring to MRIP, which actually provides the catch at length. And so when we look at 2017, which is our reference year, approximately 0.22% of fish harvested were greater than 36 inches from the total harvest. However, if you deviate from that year, let's say you look at 2018, it could be larger. It could be 5 to 6%. So that's what he's referring to when he says that 1%. I believe he's talking about the 2017 year.
Follow up?
And question number 2 again was related to the relationship between size of fish and spawning potential. And we had talked about it being exponential, but I believe the relationship being exponential, I believe the slide had said linear, and I just wanted some clarification on that.
Right, it is linear. There are multiple studies that show that the larger the fish, it's a linear relationship. I believe VIMS actually just came out with a publication that looked at 4 or 5 different studies, all showed a linear relationship. Larger females, more eggs.
Okay.
Follow up?
Final question, I promise. Help me understand the timing of where we are here, and we enacted one emergency amendment. This is a second that will cover the October season, and then there's a potential we'll be here in October again for further seasons.
So what will happen October 30th is ASMFC will make a decision on the approach. And what we're going to do from staff's perspective is come with a request next month saying that we're going to request a quota change. We don't know what that's going to be right now. We will know October 30th, and then it will be during the November public hearing that we'll address that. We'll also, I believe, next month be further addressing the minimum size limit date. So right now, the minimum size limit is 28 inches from March 26th to June 15th commercially. Historically, we've had a March 16th to June 15th. It just goes to protect really the spawning stock during that month when they're really prevalent. And that's really, that's really what's on the table at this moment.
Mr. Zetron.
Some of the people who spoke suggested that why don't we just close the season during the spawning period?
Right.
Why are we not doing that?
We looked at that right away. So what MRIP suggests to us is that during the spawning season or the Chesapeake Bay spring season, it only accounts for approximately like 4% of savings. We just don't harvest a lot of fish during that time. So we're being held by ASMSC to achieve at least an 18 or 20% reduction. So cutting that season out alone will not achieve that. We're in Virginia, we're really heavily weighted towards November, December. 85% of our harvest occurs then. So making season adjustments, you'd have to take a lot of the season in the beginning, start at almost mid-November to the end of the season, or take all of December out. So this is more of a compromise to protect the spawning stock, meet ASMSC's requirements. Yeah.
Mr. Tankard?
So culturally, I think one of the things you hear in some of the testimony from the shore is the larger fish on the eastern shore.
Correct.
And then it fits in, the season seems to be a Thanksgiving to Christmas.
Right, on these, yeah.
And so if we in fact took that kind of time frame and use that as our fishing time, will we have enough savings to give ourselves a larger fish?
We would if you started at mid-November, but I would be cautious about that because I don't think that's quite fair for everyone. Virginia does harvest a lot of fish on the eastern shore, but we're a lot more than just eastern shore. There's people in the northern neck that fish up in the tributaries that primarily harvest fish in the beginning of the season. And so cutting them out is not really fair for everyone.
Mr. Ballard?
Similarly, looking at the larger fish issue, which we talked about, was 1% of the harvest. They might be different statistical points or data sets, but then eliminating the spring season would be 4%, which I believe you were just implying wasn't a big enough savings measure really to warrant. But the thing that everybody seems to be most upset about is the 36-inch limit, which we're saying is only 1%. Is that a fair comparison, or are those two different percentages I'm talking about?
Right, yeah, so You know, when we put a maximum size limit in, it's for a few reasons. One is to protect that spawning stock. Again, as Mr. Moore alluded to, 70%, this is one of the largest spawning areas coastwide. By removing those fish, we know for sure that those eggs will not make it that year. So I don't think it's fair to take away a season in the spring and allow, the harvest of large fish as a compromise. I think we need to protect those large fish.
Further questions? No?
I have just a comment.
Dr. Neal?
Kind of part, we made this decision. We made this decision last month, and so all we're doing, this is what we decided. And now we're deciding whether we screwed up or not. So are we standing by what we did last month or not? And so that's kind of where we're at. So that's my comment. So we already have the regulations. So when does this gillnet stuff take place? It already has. We did it last month. And so all these regulations are already on the books. And so now we're just deciding today whether we're going to keep what we did last month or not.
Yeah. Well, to that point, I'd like to mention a couple things that I think support why we're doing the right thing. Mr. Hughes made a comment about his attempt to go catch trophy fish. He spent 4 years trying to go up on the eastern shore and was not able to catch one. Caught 2 in 6 years. That's a little disconcerting. The issue of infighting, there is no doubt that this is an issue that is not just commercial, not just recreational, it's both, and we're in it together. As far as the tourism aspect of it is concerned, I'm deeply, deeply sensitive to the economic benefit that this fishery provides. Then again, I have to, a lot of the stuff I do is anecdotal. I can remember former director of the, or assistant secretary of the Potomac River Fisheries Commission always arranged a charter for his kids and would take Commissioner Pruitt and I out. I don't recall what year it was, but it was several, like 7, 8 years ago. We left out of Rudy Inlet and went to the Ramada Inn. By the time we got to the Ramada Inn, we left at 7:30, and by 9:15, we were on the way back to the dock with our limit with 2 fish apiece. We went the next year, we fished all the way to Chesapeake Bay and back and caught 1 small fish we had to release. We can go around and around about how to solve the problem, but the problem is there. The other aspect of it is going back to Mr. Tice's comment pertaining to the crab issue. And I know crabs are crabs and fish is fish. One of the most difficult decisions that I had to do, I did as commissioner and pushed for and advocated for, was the elimination of the winter crab dredge fishery. And I made up my mind at that point, if it was going to work, it would be working in several years. And my fishery managers tell me that from a year class, yep, it may not be 3 years, but we've got to do something. Chris indicated to me that the mortality studies may not be 1 in 9 fish are lost, maybe it's 2% that are lost. Well, that even tells me even more important that catch and releasing or get the maximum size of 36 inches is the right thing to do, because the mortality aspect is not as high as we think it is, and that fish is not going to die. Ladies and gentlemen, we've got to do something. I believe we did the right thing before, and I urge the commission to vote the same way this time. Matters before the commission for action.
So I'll take JJ's spot. I will, all meetings, he's done the same thing.
He had to go to a funeral.
Okay, well, that's a good reason. I move to accept staff recommendation.
Is there a second to the motion?
I have a comment, and
Mr. France?
yeah, the main reason we're here and we're talking about allowing to catch a big fish over 36 inches, the main thing we want to do is we want to preserve that diminished stock. And I think that's what we have to do until we can build our stock back, and I will second Mr. Neal's motion.
Motion made and a second. Further discussion. All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed?
Opposed.
Mr. Ballard votes no. Motion carries one, what do we have, 7-1. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for the comments. Next item on the agenda is item 13, proposal to Chapter 4 VAC 26-2010 pertaining to summer flounder, to revise the limit for size limit for commercial hook and line gear. Adam, before you start, just wait just a little bit, clear up. All right, sir, proceed.
This is a public hearing for amendments to Chapter 620 pertaining to summer flounder to modify the minimum size limits in the commercial hook and line fishery for summer flounder. This is an issue that's come up quite frequently over the last few years. It's come up even more frequently to the agency this year. What we currently have in the recreational fishery is a 16.5-inch minimum size limit. In the commercial fishery, we have 14 inches minimum size limit. What's happening is we have people fishing in the same areas, fishing for the same species, fishing with similar gear types, and they're bound by two completely different size limits. This 14-inch minimum size limit that you see in the commercial fishery was originally just established based on the majority of our commercial landings. Most of our commercial landings are caught offshore in trawl vessels off the coast of New Jersey. That's where that 14 inches comes from, because that's generally the size they catch, and there's an 80% mortality in any fish discarded from that trawl. So that's why that 14-inch persists in that commercial fishery so small. When you look at something like hook and line gear, whether it's recreational or commercial, you drastically reduce that mortality on caught fish. It comes down to just about 10%. As I said, this is not a new issue. It's come up quite a bit. In 1994, when the commercial hook and line was originally established, this was something that came up at the task force. It came up again in 2000 in a request from the CCA. It was brought back to the commercial hook and line task force. January 2010, it was brought to FMAC. Again in November 2010, it was brought to FMAC. Each time, all of these committees chose no actions on this item. This is the first time that it's been in front of the commission. We've received enough from it that we thought it was important to bring to the commission today for a public hearing. We did bring it most recently back to FMAC in August 2019. They made a motion that they were adamantly against any changes to the commercial hook and line minimum size limits. At that time, they cited that they didn't think it was a problem with the species. They thought it was more of a problem in perception between user gear types, recreational and commercial. They also believed that there wasn't a lot of biological benefit to changing it as well. You heard Jill earlier today talk about how we expanded our commercial landings. We are part of a coast-wide stock, which is all the way up and down. I said just a minute ago, most of our landings are taken off the coast of New Jersey. We hold back about anywhere from 10 years ago, 300,000 pounds to most recently we hold back 100,000 pounds specifically for our bay fishery. Unfortunately, even though the stock is not overfished, overfishing is not occurring, we have a very different picture of what's happening here in the bay jurisdiction. You can see on the left here, you're looking at commercial harvest over the last 10 plus years. We used to be up somewhere around 250,000 pounds, and you can see a precipitous drop in not only catch, but also effort and catch per unit effort in that commercial harvest. You're also seeing it mirrored over here in the right in the recreational harvest. We used to be up 600, 700,000 pounds, and now we're down closer to 100,000. So we're seeing a precipitous drop in these fish that are caught in the Chesapeake Bay, regardless of what that coast-wide assessment is saying that we can expand the quota. Give you a little background about the commercial hook and line license. It was established in 1994 by the Commercial Hook and Line Task Force. We do limit it to 200 individuals, so it's not a fishery that can get out of hand. They do have a minimum of 1,000 pounds of seafood sales that they need to have each year. It doesn't necessarily need to be using that commercial hook and line gear. They could go out blue crab, they could go out an oyster, but they do need to be an active commercial waterman selling at least 1,000 pounds of seafood on an annual basis in order to maintain that commercial hook and line license. A little bit of closer look, even though we have 200 participants for that fishery, only about, we'll say, just over 100 are active using commercial hook and line gear in any year. Of those 100, you can see maybe around 40 of them are actually harvesting summer flounder as part of their catch. Over the last 3 years, they catch about 15,000 pounds of summer flounder by commercial hook and line gear. We only harvest about 30,000 pounds in the bay, so it's just over half of the total harvest in the Chesapeake Bay, but accounts for almost 20% of everything caught by that commercial hook and line. We have a biological sampling program that the agency runs that goes out into the places of business and actually measures these fish for length, weight, and age information. Based on that information over the last 10 years, if you look at the bottom, I know there's a lot of numbers on here, but about 53% of the fish that are taken in this fishery are under 16.5 inches. 16.5 is that recreational limit that we are proposing to move this. 14 inches of that commercial. So 53% over the last 10 years are fish under 16.5 inches. And if you look at the last 3 years specifically, that number's grown from 53% to just about 60%. So we are concentrating more and more on those smaller fish as that's what's available. It came up on whether or not this was any kind of biological conservation. We don't have a stock assessment scientist on staff, so all we have to go is the coast-wide assessment. We do know, based on information from that assessment, I'll walk you through these graphs real quick. A male summer flounder enters this fishery at about 14 inches. When it enters that fishery at about 14 inches, most of it is probably a 1 or 2 year old based on this. 96% of those fish are sexually mature. So as soon as they come in at 14 inches, they're all sexually mature. We have the ability to take them right out of the population. If we hold off and let them to grow from 14 inches up to 16.5 inches, you can see that those fish grow to maybe 4, 5, or even 6 years old, maybe even more sometimes. So that's 2 to 3 years additional that they have to spawn. So that's just kind of a walkthrough that there is a biological benefit. There is increased spawning with allowing them to grow from 14 inches up to 16.5 inches. And that's mirrored in the females as well. Most of them enter the fishery about 1 year old, and if they're allowed to grow to 16.5 inches, they do get 2 or 3 more spawning years out of them before they get removed from the population. I'll just kind of guide you to the changes in the regulations so you can see them. If you look at page 14 of your evaluation or page 6 of your regulation, you can see up top we established the 14 inches for commercial gear, and then we come back in here and reference this section and say it's 16.5 specifically for hook and line gear caught commercially. As a side note, we do strike this down here because with the new language it becomes a little repetitive in regulation. So that would be the only change that we are proposing to make today. This has been advertised in accordance with the Code of Virginia. Staff has received 3 public comments, written public comments to date. I believe I gave them to you before. They are none of the 3 are in support of this motion. Those are the only 3 that staff has received to date on this. So staff is recommending that the commission amend Chapter 4 VAC 620 pertaining to summer flounder to modify the minimum size limits for the commercial hook and line gear from 14 inches to 16.5 inches.
Thank you, sir. Any questions from Mr. Kenyon by members of the commission? One, can't keep up with all the regulations because the numbers, because a lot. Commercial hook and line is required to catch 1,000 pounds in order to maintain?
For the commercial hook and line license, if you are one of the 200 people who have that, in order to maintain that license year after year after year, you have to report to our mandatory harvest reporting system 1,000 pounds of seafood sales. So that can be made of blue crabs, it can be made of
A year.
oysters, all years.
2 years.
2 years, thank you.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
2 years.
Well, see,
Yeah.
anyway, I just want, it wasn't a trick question, I just could not remember that, but thank you.
You're welcome.
Questions, Mr. Kenyon? All right, sir, thank you. This is a public hearing. Anyone wishes to be heard on this matter? Go ahead, come first, sir. And keep in mind, if it's on your mind, you cannot ask, just a heads up, you can't ask the gentleman if he's caught, or lady if they've caught 1,000 pounds of fish, it's against the law. I'll give you a heads up. Okay. Go ahead.
Yes, sir. My name is Rex Cox. I'm a commercial hook and line fisherman, and I'm very much opposed to this amendment. This is a copy of the summer flounder requirements I got off the VMRC website. I'd like to read a couple of the paragraphs in here. Paragraph B, the commercial harvest of summer flounder from Virginia tidal waters for each calendar year shall be limited to 100,000 pounds of the annual quota. Okay, that includes gill netters, pound netters, anybody fishing commercially in the tidal waters of Virginia. You scroll down to paragraph E of the same regulation. It says, should the commercial harvest specified in subsection B be projected to be less than 100,000 pounds, any such shortage shall be added to the following landings described in section D above, which is the offshore fishery. So what this regulation would do would not save any fish. You're stopping me from catching it, then you can turn right around and give it to the offshore draggers to catch it at the end of the year. So they're still catching 14-inch fish. All you're doing is saying you can catch it, but you can't. The commercial hook and line fishery, in my opinion, is the cleanest commercial fishery in Virginia with regards to bycatch and discards. So the measure would be taken away from the cleanest fishery and given to a fishery that might not be quite as clean. Where is the logic in that? There's no logic there. It's nothing, in my opinion, but politics and discrimination. Fishery management decisions should be made on scientific facts. There's no scientific data to support this measure, merely politics and perception. Thank you.
Thanks. Who's next? Mr. Dean?
Jeff Deem again from the FMAC committee. The reason that we voted against this is that anything, as by my experience, or I've been told, anything over 15.5 inches is usually a female. So this puts some of the pressure back on the male and takes some of it off the female stock. And as I understand it, a male can fertilize more than one female stock's eggs. So that's what we had in mind. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Ludford?
Chris Ludford, commercial fisherman, hook and liner. My mother, my wife have commercial hook and line. My mom couldn't be here today. You can believe she has pretty strong opinions on this, especially when we talk about, the waterman. She's a water woman. She'll tell you that very quickly. I don't understand. I'd ask Mr. Kenyon, why is staff recommending this specifically? Why is staff behind this?
Sir, address.
Yeah. Okay. Commissioner, I apologize.
They've already made, I think he's made a number of comments why he's recommending it.
Right, but it's
Go ahead.
15,000 pounds, and we're hoping to get back. But again, like Mr. Cox said, and I go back on the 300,000 that we've held inshore for years and never caught, and then we give it to the offshore fishery. This is a fish that the restaurants welcome, the buyers welcome. Spot loves a 14-inch fish. I see this once again, unfortunately. And we were together, 2000, that hook and line. I got my card in 94 from that, and that really, imprinted on me the need to become involved in fisheries management. Dr. Neal, you were with us in 2000, We struck that deal on spadefish. There was no science behind spadefish. We didn't fight for the spadefish. We said, we'll go with 6 spadefish, just leave us the flounder. That was a deal, because all of this is politics and perception. Let's be honest, but please don't do this to us. Please don't do this to the watermen on the Eastern Shore. Please don't do this to the children of the watermen, to the college students, to the high school students that use this to make, money in the summer to augment crab fishing. I'm asking you, please don't do this because right now floundering is slow overall. Once again, right now, the northern states are trying to up their quota. They got nothing else to fish for. They cooked the books back in the 70s and 80s, so they didn't get a great quota on flounder. They want our flounder. These flounder are going to get caught. They're going to get caught in fisheries that aren't cleaner. The Chesapeake Bay Foundation would have to appreciate the hook and line fishery. It's a zero bycatch fishery. We target one fish, we target it with a hook. I gill net, so I'm not an anti-gill net guy, but if you're for a no bycatch, a clean fishery, this is it. And the flounder we catch are valuable, sometimes 3 times more valuable than a trawl or net caught fishery. I put the dark side down on crushed ice. You get a great price from a sushi market. Even my wholesaler, my fish buyer, if I care for my fish right, he has another market for them. That's how detail-oriented we've gotten into this fishery. It's not a lot of people, but it's worth a lot to a few people. Please don't let a few voices. Again, this has come up before and all before. Now all of a sudden, with the timing, here we are a month and a half away from an election. I mean, what's the reason? Please don't do that to us. Please don't do it to the people who fish on these fish. They need this fishery. There's no science behind it. I think Mr. Cox made a great point. The fish are going to get caught, just like they do every year. Our quota gets given to the offshore fishery. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Mr. Place?
Yes, Kelly Place, speaking as the Director of Research and Policy for the Virginia Watermen's Association. Before you make a decision on equalizing the hook and line size limit, I would urge you to look at all that transpired in the years where before, during, and after that was implemented to keep the commercial size limits uniform. It was more than just what meets the eye. To keep the market, all sorts of things that for the market, the fishermen, the value of the fishery, reducing dead bycatch, reducing wasted fish, and a number of things I won't go into since I missed a good portion of this. But I would encourage you, before you make a hasty decision on this, to look at the reasons and look at the past testimony and any past studies, both in Virginia and up and down the coast, of why the commercial size is uniform up and down the coast. And I would say it seems a bit ironic, some of the detractors of this, of the fact that the commercial have this size limit in equal with other possibly less sustainable or in less environmentally sound fisheries, is so that the hook and line, which is the most sustainable, environmentally sensitive, and less impactful fishery, for the hook and line fishery, which is very small, we're not talking about something that's going to affect the stock, and the savings would be inconsequential to any flounder management plan, but to discriminate against this small group renders that fishery less viable. But it's the type of fishery we should be encouraging because there is no bycatch, and because, well, you probably know all the benefits of a commercial hook and line fishery, so I do find it ironic that some of the detractors of the current regulation are the very people that often say, oh, if all commercial fishermen caught their fish hook and line, we'd have no problem with it. So there are a whole lot of double standards there as well. So I would encourage you to look at the context within which these regulations were formed and evolved over the years before changing it in that manner. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. Who's next? Yes, sir. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. And I'm still here. My name is Bill Tice. I've been fishing ever since I could walk, I think. My parents and my grandfather taught me to fish. Now, what I'm looking at is the commercial are fishing, hook and lines are fishing the same way as recreational. So why not just, whatever you make for a rule for the size limit for recreational, roll that into, from the hook and line person, commercial-wise, into the recreational fund for the amount of catch. And the same, and then that way, you won't have people saying, well, that man over there can keep 14 inches and I gotta keep 16 and a half. That way you got it all together and it gives the recreations a little bit more leeway. Thank you.
Thank you. Kelly, you've already spoken.
I have one small thing.
No, sir.
Okay.
I-
I just wanted to correct something that's vital. But
Okay, who's next? Yes, sir, come on.
My name is Stan Zimmerman. I'm a recreational fisherman, and I have no issue with a hook and line, commercial hook and line catching a 14-inch flounder. I do have an issue with a charter captain who has a group of recreational fishermen on his charter keeping 14-inch flounder when I'm fishing right next to him with my granddaughter or something, and we're throwing 15-inch fish back. And, you know, that's my only issue, that there's a different standard. If that charter is fishing commercially, then I don't have an issue whatsoever. But when you have a six-pack charter and you have 6 recreational fishermen who charter that boat for $1,000 or $2,500, whatever they're paying for that boat, you know, it costs the same amount of fuel for me to run across the bay to fish at the bridge tunnel as it costs somebody else to run, a commercial guy, or a charter captain to run his boat across the bay to fish. I don't like the double standard of the charter captain being able to use his hook and line license to keep smaller fish when he's got a recreational charter. Thank you.
Thank you. Who's next? Yes, sir. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon. My name is Woody Gaskins. I'm from Achapunga, Virginia, over on the Eastern Shore. And I have a commercial hook and line license that I worked hard to get. I did it the old-fashioned way. In 2010, I entered the delayed entry. 2012, I got my commercial card. And then I worked towards getting that 1,000 pounds of seafood like the requirement says. I was hoping to get one the freeway in the lottery, but that didn't work. So in 2016, I purchased my license. And I pursued this license to supplement my retirement income. I was trying to improve my income. Another requirement of the hook and line is to have a certified crew list on your vessel when you're doing that. And that can be up to 15. 11 of my 15 are recreational fishermen that are only commercial fishing when they're on my boat. None of those have a problem with me commercial fishing. Hook and line is not the only gear type that we share between recreational. You can buy recreational gill net, crab pot, eel pot, and it goes on. The difference is recreational fishermen are fishing for the sport, the pleasure, and for fishing food for their family. The commercial guys are catching fish to sell, to make an income. The commercial hook and line license fishermen are the same as any other fisherman. We're selling seafood to restaurants, seafood markets, and I have customers that like fresh seafood and like to know where it comes from. 2019, this year, I spent over $400 in commercial license. The recreational person can fishing license is like $17.50 or $48 for a boat license. The flounder fishing is the main reason we're all here today. I would like to see that it would stay the same. I have a good market for flounder in the 14 to 16 inch range, and also have customers that prefer big fish. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir. Can't see you, come on up.
Good afternoon. My name is Mike Gurley. I'm a commercial
hook and line fisherman as well as a charter boat captain license. And I'd like to have staff either address, or I can state I am not allowed to commercial fish and sell my fish if I'm a charter captain. So we can't base that if one person saw somebody doing that. They're not following the regulation as it's written, and I would like staff to confirm that.
We understand that.
Okay, all right, so I just want everybody to hear that.
As long as you're obeying the law.
Exactly.
You can't do that.
Exactly.
Yes, sir.
All right, and I do that. So,
Thank you.
The other thing is I do not support the staff recommendation on lowering, of raising the length. I do catch a lot of 14 to the 16. That's a lot that we can catch and sell to make money as a living. So I do not do that. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Who's next? Mr. Barr? Good afternoon, sir.
Mr. Commissioner, Associate Commissioners, I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak to you about this matter today. My name is John Barr. I live over on the Eastern Shore in Northampton County. I am here today to speak as a commercial hook and line fisherman concerning the effects of an increase in the size limit on flounder. Fishing for flounder with the current size limits is the very biggest benefit of having a commercial hook and line license. This is a big issue for all of those that hold these licenses who have paid an average of $5,000 to $10,000, as much as $15,000 for one of these hook and line licenses. There are only 200 of these that are allowed by VMRC regulation. These licenses are the lifeline of many of the holders. They depend on the income, especially now in these tough economic times, just to make ends meet. An increase in the minimum flounder size would basically render these licenses worthless, and the hook and line fishery would be finished. I know how important these are to a lot of these fishermen, and with the chair's permission to show the level of importance, I would like to ask all of those that are here today, if you're opposed to this increase, please raise your hand. These are all commercial fishermen. They are commercial fishermen who are allowed to keep 14-inch fish the same as gill netters, pound netters, drag netters, and all other commercial fishermen. The commercial flounder fishery is a quota-managed fishery. There is an inshore quota and an offshore quota. The inshore quota is what covers the commercial hook and line fishery, as well as the pound nets and gill nets. My understanding is that to date, the inshore quota has never been met. And when that is not met, the remaining quota is given over to the offshore quota, and those are always caught. That means that the same amount of flounder are going to be caught irregardless of who catches them. It appears that a small faction of the recreational side of the fishery feel that it is unfair for someone to use the same gear as they do and be able to keep a smaller fish. They don't understand that the commercial fisherman is trying to earn a living and not just catch something for dinner that night. The recreational fisherman is not dependent upon the income from these fish to feed their family. Some of those people are probably going to be distraught when they go to a restaurant and order a flounder dinner, or stop by a market in an attempt to buy some flounder to take home for dinner that night, and they can't get it because the commercial fishermen are the ones that furnish them with these fish. This commission elected in November of 2010 to make no changes to this current regulation.
Mr. Barr, your time is running.
Okay. I'll move right along to, in closing, I'd like to point out that the reality of the situation is that there's no scientific evidence that is showing that this is going to benefit the flounder resource. It will not benefit recreational fishermen because that's set by ASMFC. I respectfully ask that your decision today be based not on someone's feeling of unfairness, but on the conversation of conservation of the flounder resource, that you not take away the lifeline of all of these license holders, that you not make these licenses that cost thousands of dollars worthless, and that you not separate the hook and line fishermen from all of the other commercial fishermen by changing the size limits. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Laura. Anyone else? Got you next, sir.
Just call me time.
That's the gentleman. I've got you next. I saw you as well.
I'm next.
No, you're up. Yes, sir.
Thank you, guys.
Yes, sir.
Just have a couple things.
Your name,
I
please,
think
sir?
James Joseph.
Thank you,
I'm
sir.
a commercial fisherman, hook and line license. I think we all know what's going on with this thing. It's people that see us catching these undersized fish, put them in the boat, and they get jealous. And they call somebody. I've been called on a couple times and reported to the DNR, and I've been checked every time. And I've always had good fish in the cooler. So it seemed like this committee, I've been down here 4 times now for the same reason. It seemed like this committee, for some reason, wants to do away with hook and line fishery. I don't know why. This hook and line fishery only catches 1/10 of 1% of the flounder each year. And that's a very small quantity of fish. So if you're determined to do away with this fishery, I got one suggestion. Everybody has a hook and line license, grandfathered in. And when you make your changes to whatever you're going to do, everybody gets a new license now, follows the new regulations. That's the only fair way to do it, if you're going to make changes.
Thanks, sir. Yes, sir.
My name is Frank Daniels Jr. I have a commercial hook and line license, and everybody said I use them to supplement my income. And for small flounder, a lot of my customers can't afford the big flounders. And yes, I got a tax number. I pay tax on all my retail sales. And so everybody else has covered just about everything. But, you know, if you're gonna take away my 14-inch fish, you might as well take my license, my boat, my rods, and my reel. They'll be useless to me. Thank you.
Sir, may I ask you a question?
Sure.
What's the difference in price between a 14.5-inch fish, or 14-inch fish, and a 16.5-inch fish?
About $5.
About $5? Okay, thank you.
It's $5 a pound. A 14-inch fish weighs about a pound. A 16.5, about 2 pounds, 1 3/4, something like that.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
My name's Woodrow Malone. I got a commercial hook and line license, and looking around this room and knowing all the hook and line people that I know, I'm 75. I'm like Mr. Joseph just said. I think if you're going to change it up, you should let it, people that's already grandfathered in, stay like they are. Because, and another thing, Mr. John asked a while ago how many people were against changing the regulation, and we saw the hands. I'd like to know how many people are for this. Would they raise their hand? Nobody. I don't know why they're changing it. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right. Thank you. Matters before the commission for discussion and action. Mr. Zedrin.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of good comments on both sides of the fence here. And, you know, I'm a licensed recreational boat as well. And I've also been on Captain Turner's boat out of Eastern Shore and seen, you know, what's been said here. I've been catching, we're over there throwing fish back, and the guy next to us over there is catching the little teeny fish and putting them in the boat. So I feel everything that everybody said on both sides of the fence. But something that nobody's talked about here, we heard the reason why the commercial fishery has 14 inches, because the trawlers, that seems to be what they catch. And so rather than throw them back when they're dead, they keep them. And so we also heard that the fishery is underfished, that the quota, we've never made the quota. So instead of talking about messing with the hook and line commercial guys, why don't we reduce the recreational to 14 inch?
I would let staff answer that. I know that, but come on up. Who's,
Yeah, so, under the current plan, it's a coast-wide plan, it's 16 and a half. That would be going against what ASMFC has already established. I don't think we can do that at this time. Thank you.
you'd be out of compliance? Mr. France?
Yeah, I see a quota here at 14 inches or a size set at 14 inches. If it's not used, if it goes to 16 and a half inches, the 14-inch fish will still be caught by trawlers. I can't see right now changing anything. It's an underfished fishery, and I think it should stay like it is.
Mr. Tankard?
Yeah, I've been on Captain Turner's boat a many a time and watch him in his disgust as he watch others catch these small fish. And his quote, why isn't conservation good for them like conservation's good for me? And I've heard the testimony today about politics and perception. I mean, that's it. When you got a boat sitting beside you catching a small fish and throw it in his cooler, well, you're fishing with the same doggone channel, the same doggone rigs, the same rod, and they're able to catch smaller fish. It doesn't make sense to me. It didn't make sense to Bob Turner. I've had my daughter right beside me catch a nice 16-inch fish, have to throw it back. And she's like, what happened to that guy over there? Tears in her eyes. I think, if you're fishing with a hook and line, ought to be the same. I mean, I agree. I understand these guys are commercial fishermen, but it seems to me a lot of them are, as they've said in testimony, supplementing income. I'm totally for this.
Ms. Lusk?
I think I have to respectfully disagree with Mr. Shanker. I am sympathetic to the fact that the commercial fisherman hasn't invested in a commercial hook and line license, and that is a difference. And similar to what Mr. France had to say, if these fish are going to be caught anyways, I have a hard time getting behind this.
Dr. Neal?
I did serve on a couple different hook and line task force with Chris, with Kelly, he liked to talk back then too. And I was on the recreational side, and we were very supportive of this gear type as a commercial fishing gear type. And so that wasn't an issue. It is a clean gear type, and it does provide a good quality product to the market and all that kind of good stuff. The issues were, we were concerned about recreational fishermen using this license as a way of getting around recreational fishing regulations. And that's where that's what the yelling and all that stuff, we didn't want rich doctors, rich dentists, although we're not that rich, from going out and buying these licenses and just to be able to keep, smaller fish and unlimited. And that was the thing. So we came up with, you had to have a certain poundage of seafood sales, and it didn't have to be from hook and line. It could be mainly, we just wanted commercial watermen to have this license, not recreational fishermen. We were worried about illegal charter operations, and that was a big issue, and that was the thing. And so just kind of the stuff, talking about stuff that Stan talked about. And so we tried to come up with ways of limiting that. And so you had a crew list, and you had to put that crew list in advance. And these were recommendations. I don't really know what was actually implemented. These were our recommendations. We had a recommendation of having a big commercial number on the side of your boat, like the king mackerel commercial fisherman, so that anyone could just see that you were a commercial waterman. You weren't, So we made these recommendations to make it a commercial gear types, but it really wasn't because we were worried about commercial watermen. We wanted the commercial watermen. We didn't want me to get your license and use it as a way of getting out of recreational regulations. Billy Tice is probably one of the best flounder fishermen I know, and I understand where he's coming from. But and I could take your position. I could argue both sides of this stuff. And good gosh, did we argue? We argued about it forever. And but what we came up was trying to develop a viable fishery that was kind of a niche fishery, but a viable fishery that hopefully we had enough regulations in to prevent the stuff that Stan was worried about and those kind of things. And so, I come into these meetings almost all the time. I have a bias. I'm biased towards staff recommendation. That's kind of where I'm at. We've got a smart staff, but this is one that the two guys I mentioned, they're my fishing club. He's my president and he's a board member. But I'm agreeing with Chris on this one. We hashed this out, and so this is one of these times I'm not going to support staff recommendation.
Further comments?
Yes.
Mr. Zedrin.
There was a comment made about how much money that these people put into their fishery. Well, if you have the kind of boats that Dr. O'Neill and I have, that don't even pay the taxes. But, so I don't think it's about that. Everybody puts in the money they want to into whatever they want to, whether it's for recreational, whether it's to add income to your retirement or do that type of thing. So, I don't think that's important. I think what Dr. O'Neill said is important, is that if the idea was to create a fishery, we should do what we can to support that fishery and make changes. And I asked a very question to staff here a couple of months ago about why is this 14 inches around, for the commercial guys? And then you heard it again today. And it's because that's what they catch out there. And rather than throw all these flounders back, that we're going to let them go with a 14 inch. But that's the same reason why I said a minute ago, why don't we reduce the recreational to 14 inches? And I got the answer, which was the federal agency says, no, it's got to be 16 and a half. So, like I said, I can see both sides of the fence, but when it comes down to you can't do what I'm asking, I'm going to have to support what he says.
One last comment.
Sure.
We limited this fishery to 200 total possible. And so I'm dang impressed with the percentage of the entire population of commercial hook and liners that are here today. We have a pretty high percentage that have already spoken to us. That shows how important this is to them.
Mr. Ballard?
I think it's pretty clear this isn't an easy issue, and certainly no one wants to see Mr. Tanker's daughter crying or hook and line fishermen out of work. And I try and get guided by the data when that happens. And I haven't seen the data that really justifies making this change from what is currently the status quo. We've got the percentage of hook and line of summer flounder increasing over the last decade, as well as a back-end number that it's the 10% of total harvest is commercial hook and line. But what I'm not seeing is, yes, the percentage of people using hook and line for summer flounder is increasing, but I haven't seen the total pounds, and that we're actually taking more from hook and line increasing. And I think if I were to see that, I would be more inclined to vote for this measure. But just kind of the notion that the percentage of it's increasing, well, that also means the percentage of pound net gill net is going down by definition. But what we need to see is an increased taking of the biomass in total, with this method being exploited almost, is what I'd look to see. And the data, at least in my mind, is not really proving that out to me. So don't know if we're at motion point or not.
Well, not yet, but we will be. If I can see where this is going, and if I was one of those folks that just said, okay, well, I know where it's going, I'll just keep my mouth shut. I can't do that. It's just not right. I'm of a firm belief that while we're supposed to look at data, we're also supposed to be driven by the law of the Code of Virginia. The conservation aspect of it, when you have a 14-inch fish that can grow to 16.5 inches and has at least 3 years to spawn, to me, makes a difference. Now, I've heard what we said about, oh, it's going to be caught out on the coast. That might very well be true. The quota poundage does go to the coast. I'm not going to debate that. But I still think, from a conservation perspective, that it is a benefit to have a 16-inch minimum fish. The other thing that's never been brought up is these commercial hook and line guys, they can still catch flounder with a commercial hook and line. They just, if you increase the size, you increase the size. Now, I've heard the argument that, well, the 14-inch fish, somebody can afford. The 16.5-inch fish, they can't afford. I don't buy that. I don't buy that whatsoever. The other aspect of it is those that went out with a commercial hook, but to buy a commercial hook and line, say what you want. There are those out there, and I'm convinced, that bought the commercial hook and line to simply circumvent the recreational limit. You can talk to me all day long about that, but I believe that is a problem, that is an issue. The Code of Virginia is specific, and I'll read you the management plan. The Commission shall prepare and implement fishery management plans so as to preserve the Commonwealth's exclusive right to manage the fisheries within its territorial jurisdiction. Any fishery management plan prepared and any regulation promulgated to implement the plan shall be consistent with the following standards for the fishery conservation and management. Number one, conservation and management measures shall prevent overfishing while achieving the optimum yield for each fishery. The optimum yield of each fishery means the amount of fish or shellfish which shall provide the greatest overall benefit to the Commonwealth with particular reference to commercial fishing for food production and to recreational fishing. Conservation and management measures shall be based upon the best scientific, economic, biological, and sociological information available. To the extent practicable, an individual stock of fish shall be managed as a unit throughout the territorial waters of the Commonwealth, and interrelated stocks of fish shall be managed as a unit or in close coordination. Conservation and management measures shall not discriminate amongst user groups. If it becomes necessary to allocate or assign fishing privileges amongst various user groups, such allocation shall be 1, fair and equitable to all fishermen, 2, reasonably calculated to promote conservation, and 3, carried out in a manner that no such person acquires an excessive share of such privileges. I'll entertain a motion.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that regulation points out that fair and equitable, I mean, there you go. And if we're going to conserve, we should be conserving with all fisheries. And so I'm moved to accept the staff recommendation.
Is there a second to the motion?
I second it.
Second by Mr. Zedrin. Further discussion?
Yeah, I have I guess I have a little bit of a legal question. That fair and equitable, treat them the same. And so you're applying that to hook and line fishermen regardless whether commercial or recreational at the same size limit, although we have different bag limits and that kind of thing. And then I'm holding this letter from Harry Dorothy about would it be legal to differentiate between different gear types in the commercial fishery? So I mean, is it okay for a pound netter to keep a 14-inch flounder, or they catch some flounder, where we tell a hook and line fisherman he can't keep one to it's 16 and a half, or, so I guess using the same language you just read, and so I don't know.
Is this a question for me?
Yeah, I guess it's kind of a question for you. So it says we're supposed to treat everyone the same. So are we treating them the same between hook and line, commercial versus recreational? Or are we treating them the same between commercial versus commercial, different gear types?
So we can read that regulation. Where is that?
It is statute 28.2 203. And it's number 4 is the relevant language. So in terms of allocating between gear types, and I am not a scientist, I'm an attorney, so, but what I have been hearing is that the reason we have a smaller limit for pound nets is that there's more, they catch 14 inch. And so if they bring it on the boat, they don't really have the point of discriminating without having all of this bycatch that doesn't necessarily achieve a conservation purpose. Is that correct?
It's
or
the
is that not?
draggers, offshore draggers. It's not that just they catch all sizes of fish, but because even if you do their mesh size, they catch 3 big flounder, then all the other flounders jump up against them. And so it's really the draggers that reason we have that 14-inch minimum. And I'm not sure we have a minimum at all, because of everything. Why are we throwing back 12 inches that are dead?
There's a higher mortality in trolling fishing too.
So it's the offshore fishery that really is why we have a low minimum.
Okay, so that makes sense for that gear type? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes.
Okay. Hook and line, it sounds like that issue is not so much of an issue because there's less mortality. Is this also correct?
Yes.
So in that case, I think 4 Romanet 2 comes in reasonably calculated to promote conservation, and that's one of the factors to consider if it becomes necessary to allocate or assign fishing privileges among various user groups. Now, user groups, I'm getting a bit in the weeds, but bear with me, doesn't seem to distinguish between, can we allocate between gear types versus commercial versus recreational. It seems to indicate if you have to allocate among user groups, whatever those groups may be differentiated by, whether it's differentiated by gear types, by commercial, what have you, you consider these 3 factors. The allocation has to be fair and equitable to all fishermen, reasonably calculated to promote conservation, and carried out in such manner that no person acquires an excessive share of such privileges. So if we're going to allocate among user groups, it has to meet those same, those 3 factors. Does that make sense?
Nope. Not to me. Does it make sense to you?
Yeah.
Sit between 2 attorneys.
And you got paragraph 6 too, can I speak?
Well, absolutely.
Yeah.
It says, paragraph 6 of 28.2203 says, conservation management measures shall take into account variations among and contingencies in fisheries, fishery resources, and catches. And so that kind of explains the difference as well, is that while one can do it, one can't. This is a tough one.
It is, and I think
Thank you, Mr. Chief.
it's not, I don't think the statute is designed to, like, lock the commission in to some sort of hard line. It's designed to allow us to consider the fishery using these 3 factors.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, sir, Mr. Zedrian.
I want to ask that, so, you know, we do things different sometimes than the Atlantic fisheries and that just type of thing. So.
Mr. Gear, come to the podium.
So, you know, like, I know, a couple years ago, whatever, they closed the fishery in the federal waters, and we kept it open, and so we were not compliant. So, I'm still going back to my idea. If we switch, and instead of taking away from the commercial guys, the 14-inch, I know if we go to the recreational at 14 inches, we're not compliance, but what detriment will that do to us?
Where do I start? If we don't comply with the ASMSC regulations, we'd be found out of compliance.
And
they can shut our fishery down.
But we could do that when we were not compliant before, right?
We were not compliant before. We didn't go against ASMFC. We went against, with the feds who really didn't have jurisdiction here at all. It was the South Atlantic Fisheries Management Group. He's talking about cobia.
And if they shut the fishery down, it's not just that component, it's the entire, flounder would be shut down completely. commercially, recreationally, everything.
All right. Further questions?
No, I don't have a question. I just find, like, as you mentioned in 28.2-203, that in point 4, the third part of it, carried out in such a manner that no person acquires an excessive share of such privileges. It speaks for itself.
So what, I'm sorry.
Mr. France?
So what we're saying here is that the one fishery is discriminated over the other one. Is that what we're saying?
That's what it seems to be.
That's what I'm saying that the code says. And I just, as I said before, we're not taking away the ability of a commercial hook and liner to catch flounder for a living. We're not.
Absolutely. Absolutely, no doubt.
It's enough. I've been very fair and quiet in where we're discussing it. That's what I'm saying.
Would you read
We can-
numbers 5, 6, and 7, and 28.2, 203?
Kelly Place, you're out of order. You've been out of order several times today, and I haven't gavelled you down. You've been raising your hand, you've been opening your mouth, you're out of order. And if you do one more time, I ask you to be removed. That's it. That's enough.
I apologize.
Thank you. I think it's probably time to, I can't call the question, but
You have a motion and a second.
you do.
Yeah, so you can call the vote, I guess.
Any further discussion? Mr. France? Roll call vote.
No.
Mr. Tankard?
Aye.
Mr. Zedrin?
Aye.
Mr. Neal?
No.
Mr. Ballard?
No.
Mr. Minor's absent. Ms. Lusk?
No.
Ms. Everett?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion fails on a tie. Thank y'all very much. Any further business to come before the commission? If not, meeting adjourned. Wait a minute, you don't,